Hi all, welcome to the very first Interface Google Hangout. My name is Laura Kremer. I'm Internal Communications, Sustainability and Sustainability Manager at Interface and the moderator today. We will be discussing all aspects of eco-design and embedded carbon, and thank you to all those who have joined us to date. To keep up to date with this Google Hangout, visit the Interface Twitter channel at interface_UK and tweet us your questions using the hashtags ecodesign and interfacespeaks. I suggest we get started right away, and I would like to introduce our 5 panelists. I'm very pleased because I'm here today with 5 sustainability and industry experts. I would like to welcome Dr. Craig Jones. Welcome, Craig. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us from where you are joining us?
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Craig Jones. I'm joining today from Bristol in the United Kingdom. And I've spent the last 10 years researching embodied carbon, life cycle assessment, and environmental impacts of making products, constructing buildings, and many different types of things.
Thanks, Craig. Our second panelist is a colleague of mine. Welcome, Ramon Arratia. Ramon, can you also say a few words what your role in Interface is and from where you are joining us?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ramon Arratia. I'm the Sustainability Director at Interface, and I'm joining from a hotel in London.
Thanks, Ramon. Our third expert on the panel is Fritz Lietsch, a fellow countryman from Germany. Fritz, it looks like you're not in Germany right now. Please tell us where you are and also give us a brief background.
Hi everybody, I'm editor in charge of Forum CSR International. I'm right now in Italy doing some research work about plastics and microplastics in the sea, and I'm in a very nice place right now on the beautiful island of Elba to the also beautiful island of Corsica, and I'm happy that we are having this discussion about how to produce more sustainable and smarter products.
Thank you, Fritz. We are now all a little bit jealous. I would like now introduce Cédric Borel. I'm very pleased having you on our Google Hangout today as well. Welcome, Cédric, and please also say a few words about yourself and let us know from where you are joining.
Hi everybody, I'm very glad to be there, and I am the Managing Director of the French Institute for Building Performance. It's a business-led coalition trying to make it happen on the ground, so full sustainability at all stages. That's what we are aiming to. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Cédric. Last but not least, we have Richard Smokers joining us from the Netherlands. Also, very warm welcome to you, Richard. And please also say a few words about yourself and let us know from where exactly in the Netherlands you are joining us.
Thank you, Laura. I'm joining you from Delft in the Netherlands, in between Rotterdam and The Hague, small historic city. Also very beautiful for holiday purposes. I'm a principal advisor at TNO, which is a large independent research organization in the Netherlands. And my main subject is sustainable mobility. The reason why I was asked to join this webinar was that I have a long background in helping the European Commission set up the CO2 standard, CO2 legislation for passenger cars and vans. And also over the more recently, the last years, I've been heavily involved in carbon footprinting of logistics activities. And those are 2 examples which might be helpful for the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for your brief introduction. So we have lots of expertise on this panel in different fields today, and if you would like to engage with our panelists, please visit the Interface Twitter channel at interface_UK and use the hashtags ecodesign and interfacespeaks for sending in your questions. Interface is the world's largest global manufacturer of commercial car peptides. In the mid-1990s, Interface made a pledge to eliminate the impact the company has on the environment by 2020. This promise is known as Mission Zero, and it influences every aspect of the business. The reason Interface has pioneered this event today is to kickstart the debate around embedded carbon and to discuss the recently created white paper, Designing Sustainability, which was authored by Ramon. The aim of the Google Hangout today is to generate and encourage future conversations about the issues, and the outtakes from this debate, as well as the ideas generated, will be used alongside Ramon's white paper to produce topical content across digital and other media platforms. I'm now giving a brief introduction to the white paper. The white paper can also be found on the Interface webpage and on the Interface Cut the Fluff blog. I am sure you will be aware that great strides have been made in redesigning products that use and emit energy, and this should not stop. However, to have significant positive impact on the environment, industry must embrace radical sustainability and look into radical innovations, reducing the embodied carbon in their products. So the key question today is how we are finding an answer to these challenges and how we are mobilizing organizations and businesses to make a fundamental change in the way products are being produced. To answer these big and principal questions, our panelists will debate 3 key topics outlined in the white paper. The first topic we will be discussing comes with the title Money Talks, Incentives through Regulation. So first of all, I would like to discuss with you the idea of incentivization through regulation, and in particular, the benefits that the automotive industry has seen since introducing a financial incentive to keep CO2 emissions low. Ramon, you have authored the white papers. Can you please let us know your thoughts on what the car industry has done and what you're thinking about the method?
Basically, I see, let's say, 2 main types of products. There are products where most of the carbon is in use phase, like a car, like a vacuum cleaner, like an air conditioner. There are machines that use energy for functioning, and there are products that has the carbon embedded in the raw materials, like cement, carpet, a building, most of the physical things. Product design is the key to decrease carbon along the whole life of the cycle of those products. And we were looking at interface, and we discovered that only 10% of our footprint is in our operations, where most of the footprint is outside our operations, mainly on the actual, on the embodied part. Now, we have products in the market today. There are some products that have 20 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. We have products with 3 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. They both pay the same tax. There is no incentive in the market to help or incentivize the manufacturers to go for lower embodied impact products. So we went jealous at what happened in the car industry, where they designed what they call these magic metrics, kilograms of CO2 per kilometer. And then this has enabled that the concept of that magic metric, I think, is so smart, because obviously it's not the full impact of the car, but it's the most important impact of a car. And then it has enabled really smart legislation. The first thing is transparency. Just by having mandating transparency at the point of sale, mandating transparency in advertising, people are aware and people are literate about that metric. You don't need any label to say whether a car is has more carbon or not. You just have the actual metric. So my mom already knows that 200 grams is too much and 90 grams is quite all right. That's the first thing that enabled that magic metric. The second that thing is all the school targets, top-down target for the industry. So each car manufacturer has to arrive to 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer at 2020 on their average portfolio. And I don't care whether you are Jaguar or Renault. You know, it's a metric. I love that. Obviously, the French manufacturers were very happy at the beginning with that metric because they had smaller cars. But then the Germans have been tremendously successful technically in achieving that. And then what I think is even more interesting is that this magic metric allows the member states to have incentives depending on the carbon. So because VAT and product taxes are something which are for member states, in France there is a bonus-malus system, so more CO2, you pay more tax. In the UK, in company cars, the same, you have more CO2 for the cars, and then you pay more tax. So we were thinking, how can we learn in the building sector from the regulation of the car industry? And we thought, well, it could be applied for embodied carbon as well, and it could be applied for the energy used at the building. For example, you can have building ratings attached to the taxes. For example, energy efficiency of the buildings attached to the taxes that you pay for the local council, and the same for material. So we thought that idea of regulating a product with a magic metric could be applied to embodied carbon.
Thank you, Ramon. Before we are looking into the construction industry, we have an expert on our panel today. Richard, you are the advisor of the Dutch government and the European Commission on Transport Emissions and Sustainable Mobility. And you are also an expert in regards to the magic metrics that has been, as Ramon mentioned, successfully been introduced in the automotive industry. Please let us know your thoughts on the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, and if you believe that the magic metrics can also apply to other industries.
Thank you. First, a small correction on Ramon's explanation of the legislation. It's not correct that all manufacturers need to meet the same 95 grams per kilometer target. This target is actually differentiated with a target function that differentiates the target as a function of mass. So that means that a manufacturer that on average sells bigger, heavier cars is allowed to meet a higher target than a manufacturer that sells small cars. So it's actually in the way this target function is tilted that determines whether the French and Italian manufacturers like it or not, and whether Mercedes and BMW have a difficulty or not. So it's not one target for all; it's differentiated. But there are a couple few lessons in this. First of all, I think we need to get some terminology right. We speak about CO2 regulation and metric, but the metric is one thing, regulation is another thing, and paying taxes that relate to your score on the metric is again another thing. And so regulation is a legal instrument, and taxes is an economic instrument, and they work out in different ways, but they both need a metric. One of the lessons that I've learned over time from the metric is that it makes a huge difference whether you use a metric as a design performance indicator or as a basis for legislation and taxation. Because if you use it as a basis for legislation and taxation, it puts way higher demands on the underlying definitions and methodologies with which you calculate the metric. And that's what we've actually seen in the passenger car regulation. In principle, determining how much fuel or how much CO2 a car emits doesn't seem too difficult. You drive and then you know how much gasoline you need to tank. But if you want to put it as part of a regulation, you need to have a very specific test procedure to actually put this value to a car. And what we've seen is that the test procedure that was available in cars under the type approval regulation for cars in Europe had some flaws, which meant that actually manufacturers, by carefully utilizing flexibilities in the legislation, were able to reduce their score on the metric by 20 grams per kilometer without actually changing something to the car, but by simply more cleverly doing the testing. So that's an experience that makes that in a research environment, this metric, the definition of the metric is less critical than when you use it in an environment where actually money talks, where there's economic interest involved with meeting the target or not. So that's one important lesson I think I want to give into this discussion. Also, if you speak about carpets with 100 or 30 kilograms per square meter of CO2 emissions, in an analysis, the definition is not so critical. As soon as you put money value on it by taxation or a legal standard, it needs to be below 50 kilograms. Then industry will find very clever ways of utilizing all the flaws in the test procedure to actually achieve the target without fully achieving the desired environmental benefit. So before opting for regulation, you really need to look very carefully at your methods, at your definitions and your measurement procedures to see whether these are fit to be included in a legal instrument.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Craig, could you let us know your thoughts? You're an expert in carbon footprinting, LCA, and you may want to add to what Richard has been talking about in regards to measuring.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So to give a bit of context, most of my work in the past has been in the building and construction sector. I have done some work on the embodied carbon in the car sector. So I think the transport sector is a good sector to look at to show the benefits of imposing targets that manufacturers have to meet, and that's something that we don't have in the building sector. Of course, a car is very different than the building, and in many ways it's easier to impose them on the automotive sector than it is something the size of a building. The other thing about the targets in the transport sector, which if you look at the reduction in CO2 emissions, have created incredible improvements over the last more than a decade, really. But they are targets on the operational carbon of a car. So that's just the tailpipe emissions of the vehicle. It doesn't include the embodied carbon of making the vehicle, which there's not enough studies around in this area. But I believe Jaguar did a study a few years back, and it depends how far you drive a car, of course, but all of the carbon to make the car, I believe, was of the order of 20–25% of the life cycle carbon footprint of the vehicle. But the other thing about the tailpipe carbon dioxide emission targets is that when trying to map that across to the building sector, that would be more comparable to regulating the operational carbon emissions of a building rather than the full embodied impacts. So although I think it is a great thing to look to and have a look at the lessons to map across to the building sector, but I think to work in the building sector we'd need to capture the full whole life emissions of buildings, so all of the embodied carbon to make the materials, as well as the operational carbon of the building.
Coming back to my issue, the question is, are your LCA methods ready to be used in this context? We're actually at the moment doing a study for DG Climate to look at the CO2 legislation beyond 2020, so what needs to come after the 95 grams. And as part of that discussion, where the Commission takes really a greenfield approach, they're recognizing that we should not only look at tailpipe emissions, but actually at the whole well-to-wheel cycle. Electric vehicles are zero tailpipe emissions, but electricity production is not zero emission. And it's also recognized that if you go from a conventional to an electric vehicle, that the actual energy demand and CO2 emissions associated with constructing the vehicle increase, even though the use phase improves. So that is being discussed, but the lesson that we learned is that actually regulating the use phase of a car, which is still a fairly simple product, is already quite difficult. And if you want to expand that to, say, measuring the footprint of a whole industry that's behind that, including the international dimension, the methodology needs to be ready for that. And that's a question that I would like to ask you. In the case of interface, in the case of buildings, do you believe that the LCA calculation methods are fit to serve as a legal basis for a standard or for taxation?
I think this is probably a question to answer for Cédric. He is very well experienced, especially in the construction industry. And if you don't mind, please, let us know your thoughts.
I'm stepping in the debate because there is no cross pan-European consistency in the definition of LCA. Let's say there is a general standard, European standard, and then there is local definitions or calculation rules. They are pretty, let's say, industry-led, and they are not cross-industry consistent. So there is, I think, I will cast a shadow on the dream of a unique metric, but there is some local rules, or let's say industry-specific rules, depending whether you are in the steel industry or in the carpet industry, etc., etc. So this is a first light on the debate, but I think there is still room for improvement, not maybe in regulation, but on voluntary standards or voluntary schemes to take into account the CO2 emissions of products. Let's say today there is no pan-European consistency on that. But I can return a question to Richard to say maybe the only place in Europe where there is consistency for CO2 emission is the cap and trade directive. The cap and trade is the CO2 emission market at European level. And this is a hope for calculation of pan-European metrics for industry.
But I think I get a sense that everything there is a debate here about everything needs to be perfect, all the methodologies and all before we enable legislation. I disagree. I think we need to go and we need to. If we want to advance, I mean, at European level, we should push for at least signaling. When the car industry started with an imperfect system, which companies could cheat the methodology that didn't only include tailpipe, there was response, and there has been technologies that were buried in the supply chain for many years, like auto stop, start. Like lightweighting of vehicles, that many different things that now are a reality. And I don't care whether the methodology is 100% right or not. Then these things, you let the experts to argue and to come up with the things. But what we cannot allow is a discussion to let different industry groups to come out with a perfect solution, because they will never agree. The steel industry will want something, the wood industry will want something else, and they will never agree. I think we just need to get on with an imperfect solution and signal companies that embodied carbon is important and they should start redesigning products. Otherwise, we will have another 10 years with no action.
Fritz, I saw you nodding. What are your thoughts? What would you like to add in regards to what Ramon has just been saying?
Ramon is absolutely right. We should stop, discuss, we should start. We may fail, we may make mistakes, but we will learn out of the mistakes, but we have to start. Otherwise, we will lose too much time.
Any other closing comments in regards to incentivization through regulation?
Yes,
Richard, do you want to make one more point?
Yeah, just a nuance. I think I agree with Ramon that indeed at some point you need to start. My comment was not intended as you can't start unless the procedure is perfect. I always explain around the CO2 legislation on cars, at least we have a CO2 legislation and at least there is things happening, but we now need to fix the flaws. But what I've also seen in some processes, for instance the eco-labeling of houses in the Netherlands, that in certain of these initiatives, at some point the flaws in the system may work against you. If something gets a bad framing, it may be killed along the way because of certain things that are not intrinsically wrong in the method, but cause undesired side effects. So you need to have some minimum set of requirements and some minimum testing of your procedures to know that you are good enough to go. And then, of course, along the way, you improve and then increase the performance of the system. So I totally agree with that, but it's you do need to have this check on a certain minimum set of requirements that need to be met before you can really start, because otherwise you might be digging your own grave by getting negative press on your labeling, which then totally kills the initiative, and that you don't want to have.
And I will add a big hope for everybody that investors in real estate, they do understand carbon. Yeah. Carbon is the only thing that they want to notice out of their portfolios. So let's start with them. They are driving a low carbon economy, or they are rating the carbon level of their portfolio, and I think they can include embodied carbon. They have to, and there is a big hope for them on this side to include carbon into technical requirements.
I have something to add, going back to the question if LCA methods are ready to legislate. In the construction sector, there is an EU-wide standard on the calculation of LCA impacts for buildings specifically. There's a building level standard that came out in 2011, an EU-wide standard, and a product level standard for environmental product declarations that came out in 2012. And whilst they don't solve all of the answers of method inconsistency, of course, if you go back to 2010, there was no EU-wide standard available. So it's still taking industry a bit of time to catch up and change all of their models and tools, software to and to have enough data on products, so environmental product declarations for everyone to do building level life cycle assessment studies to the same method, but it's getting better there, and it just needs a little bit more of the gaps plugging before it's probably there and ready to be used to legislate. So I think that's a big step forward, and just needs a little bit of extra work before that's ready there.
We were the first company to commit to have all the products with EPD based on 15804, and you know, we have already several years of experience on that. And at the end of the day, you know, how that has affected our product designers. You know, now every of our product publish CO2 per square meter, which is the main, let's say, magic metric for a carpet tile. And we have products of 20, we have products of 7, we have products of 3. And by changing raw materials and by playing with the weights, now it's quite clear for any of our product designers what are the factors to come up with low carbon, embodied carbon carpet tile. Of course, then it would be tricky. You know, it would be tricky to compare. You know, in some methodologies, you know, wood versus you know, steel, and there would be, you know, quite a huge difference between doing with some methodology or another. Yes, there are, but I think we need to leave a external third party to do proper research and then set up those rules, and then that should become European legislation. But at least for now, to compare product categories with product categories, I think we're in a really good position to make judgments.
I would suggest, before we are discussing EPDs and life cycle assessment in more detail, I would like to move on to the second topic. And the construction industry has been mentioned a couple of times now as an example. And the second topic in the white paper is also focusing or taking the construction industry as an example. The title of this section is Creating the Demand, the Role of Voluntary Standards. It is becoming more and more apparent that despite the lack of regulatory action, voluntary standards are being created in some sectors to cut embodied carbon out of products. BREEAM, for instance, in the UK, or HQE in France, DGNB in Germany, are examples where developers are being encouraged to specify lower impact construction materials, and manufacturers are designing new products, what Ramon has been mentioning, to meet that demand. Cédric, how would you value and how do you think this voluntary schemes such as BREEAM, HQE, LEED or DGNB are how important are they in the industry, and should we be relying on them over requirements and incentives?
I think they're very, very important tools, because these tools have taught the market what sustainability was. People are practicing these standards, or let's say that they don't. They are on today. Everybody know what's in the standard, and there have been 20 years of certification schemes going around. So everybody is using it, and there is a huge advantage in the connection they have today into the connection into the new construction schemes and the in-use phase. Everybody is looking at that today in the market, I think, and they want to bridge the two certification in order to have low impacts in the whole life cycle. And today, all these certifications are looking at LCA rationale, and they are integrating rules for LCA. And this, I think, it's a huge takeoff for these methodologies. And today, we see a lot of owners, designers, and developers trying to think life cycle and being taught to think life cycle. And this is happening today.
Craig, you're an expert in carbon footprinting, as mentioned before, and you have helped companies calculating LCAs. You've been designing carbon calculators. What is your experience, how companies deal with this subject? And if you, please let us know what you think, and share your thoughts with us, please.
So at the moment, there's very little firm incentive for companies to have to measure the embodied carbon or the full life cycle assessment impacts of their buildings. So most of the companies that are doing are looking for kind of flagship case studies or to get ahead of the curve a little bit. The exception is that if you look, there's some nice examples of where they do have to do it in construction. In the UK infrastructure sector, so construction of water infrastructure for mains water from your tap, they have to measure the whole life embodied carbon plus operational carbon of all of the new build assets that they plan to do over their 4 or 5 year reporting cycles. So that's a very good example of where companies have had to measure embodied carbon of the assets, and out of that have come some excellent case studies that have shown that by measuring embodied carbon, by having to measure embodied carbon, they've reduced embodied carbon significantly, and some of the best case studies show that they've actually reduced the embodied carbon of their projects by over 20%, and they've also reduced the build cost of their projects by over 20% as well. So it shows that when they're done in the right way, that it can save a lot of impacts. The other great case study in Europe is in the Netherlands, in Holland, where all buildings over 100 square meters that are residential or offices need to have a life cycle assessment done for carbon and the amount of resources used to make the building. So there's no requirement to reduce those impacts yet, but the first step of getting there is measurement. And quite often what you'll find is by measuring something, people then start to understand more, and they of course naturally want to reduce. So that's another great case study in Europe. So we need to look to these case studies and see how we can map these in other countries across Europe, I'd say.
Ramon, can you share some insights from your perspective? Interface started publishing EPD or doing life cycle assessment in 2000, and EPDs are available for all European products. Please share your thought how this is helpful in managing the product portfolio internally, but how EPDs are also helping communicating externally.
I think for us, the whole thing is the whole switch about LCA and EPDs has been fundamental and transformational for the business. Before, selling carpet to a customer was about, I have this label, or my company is more environmentally friendly than yours, without proving it. It was such an empty conversation and with no footprint. Now we have a platform where we just provide the information to customer. You can buy this carpet tile, 12 kilograms of CO2 per square meter, and our competitors have to do the same EPD and the same under the same program owner, and we have agreed that all the calculations need to be done by the industry association, so that all the assumptions, etc., need to be made by the same association. So it's not only that we comply with the same standard, but the program owner is, is the same. In our industry, we do it through the German IBU, and also we do it through the same association, GUT. That gives us a very standardized way. And so we don't patronize our customers saying my products are better than our competitors, etc. We say, look, you have all these different type of products. Each of them have a different CO2 footprint, and then it's up to them to choose. And then maybe they choose something because of the design, but also they take into account carbon footprint. So it's a very good way of having transparency in the process. Now, that has affected the way we design our products, because then we started to do research on what are the factors. So we discovered that the yarn is the main impact of a carpet tile, and then we started to develop products with 100% recycled yarn. Our supplier invested in a huge amount of money in repolymerizing that yarn. Then we look at the next steps. Okay, so for example, latex, and now we are making, we're using a substitute for the latex from recycled sources. And we're looking at every single raw material and how can we substitute that raw material for something either recycled or bio-based or low carbon that is an alternative to get that down. Just to give you an example, there is carpet in the market for 60. If you have wool carpet, you will have 60 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. And today, our average carpet is around 7 kilograms, 8 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. And the best carpet we have in the market is 3. So by product design, you can make a huge difference in the actual carbon. The problem is that there is no economic incentive for our customers to buy that carpet yet, like it is for other industries. And that's
in this regard, sorry to interrupt, Ramon, I would like to hear your thoughts, Fritz. What do you think? Should we be relying on voluntary standards or relying on these standards over legal requirements and incentives? What is your opinion?
Both. I think we have to have pacemakers like interface testers and so on, who are creating, who are doing the first steps voluntary, and who are pacemakers for the whole process, because the legal standards normally take a long time to be implemented. And this would also be one of the questions of Ramon. Wouldn't it be possible that the strongest brands are working together in order to enforce this voluntary standards, so that the market demand, because we are now in section 2, the demand sector, that we create or that we help the demand section to prefer the products that show their impact and their impact over the whole life cycle?
Yeah, totally agree. I think this is what we have done. Anticipating all these trends 10 years ago, Interface was one of the founders of Lietsch in the US. Then we've been collaborating on different countries to come up with this move. We raised the issue of EPDs, and we made a huge campaign for EPDs and the commitment to have all our products with EPDs, so that we somehow cornered the rest of the industry into EPDs.
Exactly.
And I think voluntary standards is huge, but I think now is the time to go further, and that's what we are now pushing for further action.
Definitely.
Richard.
But do you have the impression that the EPDs, for example, created demand via EBU, for example, in Germany, for your products?
How directly is that? I think EBU and the transparency has allowed many people who weren't before considering carbon in embodied carbon. Now they consider it because it's embedded in the system. Now, Laura maybe knows more about the the German market and whether there is a correlation between our sales and this type of this type of initiatives.
Okay.
Before we are diving into more detail, we have one more subject to cover. First of all, I would like to invite our audience to hand in questions and ask questions. This can be done via the Interface Twitter account at interface_UK, and please use the hashtags ecodesign and interface speaks. To round up the discussion for this specific topic, Richard, I'm interested because you have all this experience from the automotive industry. Do you think that voluntary standards and positive lobbying from enterprises like Interface can change the rules of the game, or is legislation and incentivization needed to really make change happening?
I think in many markets, voluntary standards can work. The first thing is to create a certain level of transparency on new technologies or on improved products, and make consumers aware of that there is a choice in this. We see in say, the case of my example of transport, we see this happening in heavy-duty transport, so in trucks and buses. There was no whole vehicle type approval procedure for trucks. You can't say a truck based on a standardized measurement emits so many grams per kilometer. That was not available. But the Commission started developing a procedure which was not intended to be perfect from the start, but which was a start of arriving at a CO2 declaration or certification procedure, which is not voluntary. It's actually obligatory to have the value, but there's no target attached to it. And that already helps to bring certain technologies to the market and show in a more objective way to the consumers, hey, this technology will cost you some additional investment, but it will pay back over time because it saves you this and this much fuel on the vehicle. So that's an example where this helps. And there could be sort of a 2 or 3 step approach in this. As I already said, at some point you need to start and then improve your procedures over time. What you also need to set a standard is at some point to know what a realistic standard is. And that you can do through benchmarking. So if you have a voluntary standard and the amount of information on, say, the environmental performance of products increases, and you can see who are the front-runner products or who are the front-runner companies and which are the front-runner products, you at some point can say this is the benchmark, this is state-of-the-art now. 50 grams is something that everybody can meet. And then later you can say, well, we see the market moving, and now we can say 30 grams is something everybody can meet. So as a means to get started and to get the necessary information on the table, and in the meantime improve your procedures, this voluntary agreement is a good thing. Mm-hmm. What I do not believe is that if you look at the long term, the 2050 perspective, where we in the Western world need to reduce CO2 by 80%, just by voluntary agreements, you will not reach 80% in many markets. Especially when at some point, say, the next steps in reducing environmental footprint will make products more expensive. There I do expect that at some point regulation or, say, fiscal incentives will be necessary to differentiate the market and to really push forward. But it may be different in different markets, and it also depends on whether in the end reducing your footprint costs money or not. In certain products you will see that there will be a synergy between improving footprint and at the same time reducing costs. And in other markets you have these cost curves, marginal costs going up if you go further in CO2 reduction, and at some point things will really cost net money, things will become more expensive. Mm-hmm. So you need to look at the product and the market and the cost involved with improving sustainability. The markets where there is a cost, actually a benefit from improving sustainability, their voluntary labeling will help to get the thing going, and then at some point money will talk, and the sustainable things will actually be cheaper. In markets where sustainable things in the end will be more expensive, you can get the process going. At some point, then need to use the experience that you've achieved through a voluntary standardization by actually implementing it in a regulation or in a fiscal or whatever system.
I think the question, how to make it happen, is a great bridge to our third and final topic I want to be discussing with you now, which has the good sounding title, Making the Magic Happen, Measuring and Evaluating. So it is clear that setting goals and implementing easy measurement tools, such as the magic metric system in the automotive industry, that this achieves results. However, it's been suggested that in order to truly reduce the CO2 footprint of a product, there needs to be a measurement tool that takes the impacts of a product throughout its entire life cycle into account, what you have been discussing earlier. Craig, this question for you to answer, please. With this in mind, so taking the entire life cycle into account, what can we as an industry do to ensure that we successfully tackle carbon emissions across the entire value chain?
Okay, great. I think that's a good question. I think there needs to be more companies, a bit like Interface, that are doing environmental product declarations of their products, whether it's some products or all their product lines. It's really great to have that kind of data out there. The second thing there is that when looking at the embodied carbon of products, it's important to look at the full life cycle of a product. So there are products out there that do have a higher impact to make, but maybe they save energy operation, or maybe they last twice as long as a cheaper product that is lower embodied carbon or embodied impact to make. I'm sure there's many manufacturers that do have products out there that are a bit more carbon but have a much better lifetime out there. So I think it's about looking at the whole life carbon and other environmental impacts. And that covers the full supply chain as well. So that covers all of the first-tier suppliers, as well as all the manufacturing processes, transportation, installation, use in a building, and finally end-of-life disposal.
Ramon, would you like to comment? You've been mentioning that Interface is applying EPDs quite successfully. In the widest sense, Interface is dealing in the textile industry. Do you think it's also a feasible approach for other industries to use EPDs? And how reliant are you on data sets being provided by the first and second tier suppliers?
I think it's a matter of trying, and then the first time, you will rely on data from the normal LCA databases, and the more people do EPDs, then the more reliable data is. So it's about trying, and then second tier. For example, now we are asking all our yarn suppliers to do an EPD of their product. So then we can compare one with the other, and then they are forced to look into their supply chains, and then we get better results, and all the industry gets better results. So I think it's just a matter of getting on with it. Now, we are lucky let's say on two things. In carpet, 90%, 94% of the carpet is related to carbon. So that's why the magic metric is kilograms of CO2 per square meter. Now, if you look at food, there are several impacts. It's not only carbon. You have several impacts that you need to. So there is no single magic metric for other industries. But the fact of having an EPD is still valid. Is a good thing. And we're lucky into another thing. We are mostly B2B, and that's something. When Richard was explaining about voluntary versus legislation, which I agreed fully 100%. I wanted one other topic. You were successful with the lorries because it's mainly a B2B. It's not my mom in the supermarket. For my mom in the supermarket, you need sort of the fiscal incentives and the legislation. But for someone who is professionally paid to make cold decisions based on facts, like someone buying a lorry or for a fleet, or an architect designing a building, for those professional people, EPDs are valuable, and in B2B, that's why voluntary standards could work. Of course, economic incentives and legislation will help, but there is more likely that voluntary happens in the B2B than in the B2C. I think for B2C, anything voluntary for me is just a waste of time.
Cédric, let's dream a bit. What would be the ideal situation for you, let's say, looking in the near future, that all the companies you're working with can present an EPD, and what needs to be done in regards to innovation and measurement to make the next big steps in regards to progress?
I will say exactly the contrary what I said at the beginning. We manage workshops, B2B, like Ramon said, where owners, developers, designers were trying to write building specification with low carbon buildings, and we succeeded to make so. So everything is on the table. You have to understand what you're writing. You have to understand a bit the EPDs and how they are constructed, but all the information is on the table, and we managed to have the, let's say, the technical specification in order to have an LCA taken in account into bidding. And public procurement, for example, is a huge demand, and this demand is working on CO2 and metrics to be included into the public procurement. I think that the market is aware of the life cycle thinking, and today is ready. If there is sort of a buy-side coalition, I don't say a sell-side industry coalition, I say a buy-side coalition, public or private, is ready to write this magic metric and to say, okay, we are 50% of the buying of the buyers of product into the industry, material industry in Europe, and we want to see these metrics happening. And I think this movement buy side is can be done today.
Mm-hmm. Fritz, do you have any thoughts you want to add to this?
Many thoughts, but to wrap it up, I think we need voluntary, but the legal status is very important. And what we just heard, we also have not only to provide numbers and figures, and in the B2B sector, it's right. What you can measure, you can't manage, or what you don't measure, you can't manage. But we also have to put in good feelings, emotions. I think people want to have a good feeling when they buy a product. Also in the B2B sector, and especially in the B2C sector. So let's also fill up good products with good EPDs, with good emotions, because they will at the end provide that the products are going to be bought. And that's what is what is important about it, because if good products are making good profits, then all the producers will share the movement of making clear figures, a good analysis of the life cycle, a good analysis of the supply chain, and whenever we close the supply chain more and more, we have the information that are needed, as Ramon said, and then things are going to change. And then we're gonna push the legislation from behind to be faster, and then it's going to happen as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Time is passing by very quickly, and we have received a question via Twitter, #InterfaceSpeaks, and this is a question for everyone, and I would invite all of you giving a brief answer to this very to the question. The question is, what is realistically achievable for CO2 reductions by 2020? And please speak from your perspective and from your background. Richard, would you mind to start?
Yes, switch on the microphone. Yeah, my perspective would be the transport sector. I don't know about carpets in this case. 2020 is the target year for the 95 grams regulation, where cars were coming from 180 grams per kilometer in 2002. And are on average going down to 95 grams per kilometer. What we do see, due to the imperfect underlying test procedures, the real world reduction is not of the same percentage as the reduction that we see on on the test procedure, but in principle in the calculations as we did the technology assessment. And really this reduction of 40–45% compared to 2002 is technically achievable. And for beyond 2020, we see even further reductions possible, even in conventional cars. There are also some sectors where this is one thing maybe also good for when you speak about, say, the good feeling and the image. There are certain sectors, certain products where at some point the sort of consensus is, well, for this product it is very difficult to reduce CO2 because of these and these reasons. And in our case, for instance, the freight transport sector, so trucks were this sector where everybody said, yeah, people are already looking at cost reductions, so fuel savings are an important driver. So we can't go faster than this, we need to do biofuels. But then we found out that biofuels are really nasty things. And then you got to sort of a lock-in. Well, actually, there's still technology available to make trucks 40% more fuel efficient by 2020, 2025, and reducing the total cost of ownership. So these investments earn themselves back, and that gives really huge potentials. So things like, really, it's not about 5%, 10% in the 2020 timeframe, 2025, you can really reach, compared to current products, 40, 45, 50% CO2 reduction.
Cédric, really, can you also give a very quick 1 minute maximum answer, I know challenging, to the question, looking at the construction industry especially, please?
Oh, just especially looking at the portfolios, let's say, of the existing buildings, they got in-use energy and CO2 emission targets, let's say, an average is the European 20%. I see all the forecast of the portfolios, and I just want this 20% to happen, but I'm betting for 20%.
Craig, you work with lots of different companies and different industries, so what is your forecast?
I don't want to put specific numbers on, but I think by 2020 it's probably too close to expect any large changes in legislation. But I think that manufacturers can make great achievements on that timescale, so they can really reduce the embodied carbon of their product lines or by product redesign. I think it's also it could be more done on looking to reduce the embodied impacts of designing of whole buildings and construction projects. Mm-hmm. So you can very easily reduce the embodied carbon of a building by 10–20% without adding to the build cost. You just have to start with the quick wins and do it clever. So I think on that timescale we can see a lot more projects doing that.
Fritz, what do you believe? You are also working with lots of different businesses.
I think that makes a big difference in the different businesses. But let's just say we should try to make 20% every 5 years. And there is a friend of mine, Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, who wrote a book called Factor 5. And we should take the same techniques that he tells us or shows us in order to reduce step by step. That means to achieve every 5 years a reduction of 20%, and also, and we will only achieve it if we raise the prices for the raw materials, for the internal and external costs, because then the development and the design will be much more rapid than it is today.
Ramon, Interface made the promise to have zero negative environmental impact on the environment until 2020. If you are now looking into the subject matter of CO2 emissions, what do you believe where Interface will be in about 5 or let's say 4 years' time?
Okay, so we're looking at different scopes of influence in our own operations. We have in Europe reduced already carbon 98% since 1996. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that level is not achievable at the whole supply chain, but I'm sure we will be able to get products at 2 kilograms of CO2 per square meter, which now that would be something with a bit of help with technology we can do, and then how much we reduce our entire portfolio. It depends on market trends. It depends whether there is some push for voluntary standards, legislation, etc. But hopefully, we can at least do 40–50% reduction of average embodied carbon for the whole portfolio.
In the next 4 years?
Yeah, no, not from now, but taking into account our, the last 10 years. Okay. For example, from 2010 to 2020, we can. I think it can be feasible to do 40–50%. I think we are already on 28. So I think we can do another 25%.
The hour has gone by very quickly, and it's already 3 o'clock my time, 2 o'clock in the UK. And I would like to thank you all for taking part in the very first Interface Google Hangout with me today. I think we had a lively discussion, and we've seen that great things happening already, but that there are still some challenges out there for the industries and the companies to tackle. We will circulate a summary of the discussion, and if our viewers today, who I would like to thank for joining as well, would like to make any additional comments, you're very welcome to do so. And please get in touch with us, tweeting us via the Interface_UK Twitter account using the hashtags EcoDesign and Interface Speaks. And our Google Hangout on the topic of designing sustainability and embedded carbon can also be viewed on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Interface_Europe. So thank you very much again to our 5 experts for this lively discussion. I hope you have enjoyed the debate as much as I did. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you, as well as our viewers out there, seeing you again on one of our next Google Hangouts. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.